Paganism is on the rise in Britain and in Europe. More and more, people are looking into their native spirituality and praising the gods that our ancestors worshipped prior to the Christianization of our land. Paganism is an umbrella term for native ancestral religion. Indigenous people from all around the world are still practicing their native faiths even after all the Abrahamic interference. There is a big revival of the faith in Europe, with temples being built in Denmark, Latvia and Iceland. And here, in the historical town of Newark-on-Trent, in the East Midlands of England, there is a big step forward for heathens in England and Britain. Having been to many Christian churches throughout my life, for the first time, I am stepping into an English Odinist Temple.
So here we are now at the Newark Odinist Temple. I've been incredibly excited about this. This is a project that I'm really excited about, really support, and to be finally here feels, I'm buzzing. I mean, since I started the Western Nomad, it's all been about churches. I've been to a lot of stone circles, I've been to a lot of standing stones, but this is the first time I've been inside an actual pagan temple. So, let's go in. After walking into the temple, I had the honour of meeting Ralph Harrison, founder and director of the Odinist Fellowship, who formed back in the late 1980s. So the first question, which I'm sure you all want to know, is what exactly is the Newark Odinist Temple?
So what is the Newark Odinist Temple? The Newark Odinist Temple is the first of what we hope will be many Odinist temples which we project to establish a network of these temples throughout the country, and we're saving up at the moment, and we're very soon hoping that we will get another temple in another part of the country, and that is something that's on the cards soon. So we have been here for 11 years. Certainly there's been a flurry of interest in us from outside sources, which is very interesting, but we have been worshipping here constantly and celebrating the Odinist festivals for 11 years. We were consecrated, as that plaque says, at Midsummer 2014, which is 11 years ago now, we're 2025. And the Odinist Fellowship, which operates this temple, which is a religious society, exists to practice, promote and propagate Odinism. And Odinism, by Odinism we mean the original old religion of the English people and of Northern Europe, of the Germanic-speaking peoples of Northern Europe. So we're the old English religion that was here introduced by the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, and subsequently reintroduced by the Danes and Northmen in their invasions in the 8th century. So we've been here since at least the 5th century, if not before, as the original religion of England prior to the introduction of that exotic religion known as Christianity, which comes from further afield. So we have built up an active congregation here. We just had a midsummer gathering where we had just under 36 people here, including children, which was a very lovely event, very friendly, like a family reunion, I would say. And we had our cup of remembrance, our sacrifice of mead at the altar there. And I love the way that our members are so enthusiastic and belt out the responses to the prayers. As it was a hot day and we had all the doors open, I think people would have been able to listen to it all the way down the street. We followed this by a few breaks and then a business meeting where we discussed the affairs of the Odinist Fellowship. We operate as an open democracy, so all our members are invited to come along. Those that come along, who wish to come along, do so, and our trustees come along and make decisions and policies. And then we resumed proceedings at a local hostelry for a meal and a drink afterwards, which was all a very nice day to celebrate Midsummer, yes.
Following this, Ralph showed me the beautiful altar he had set up in the temple?
In the Odinist Fellowship, this is how we arrange our altar furnishings. And it's all actually written down in the Book of Rites. On this page, you can see a picture of the altar, and that's sort of an explanation of it. So what do we have? So we have a very simple altar, not a stone plinth, but just a table made of wood. This is made of English oak. I'll tell you a little story about it, actually. When we were furnishing the Newark Odinist Temple, one of our members worked in a furniture supply place, and I was looking for an altar which was preferably English oak, but it didn't want to be too small and it didn't want to be too big because the space is relatively limited. And he found a perfect sized altar made of English oak, very plain and simple, but he said, "Oh, I'll give it to you," because that's what they do in these warehouses. I said, no, you can't give it to me. It was a charity warehouse. I said, you can't give it to me. Nothing can be stolen or purloined. I have to purchase it off you. So I bought it for £5 for the charity. So it was a good deal. Anyway, so obviously we have altar cloths to protect the altar, and we have the candles. Again, everything is pretty simple. Plain white candles or beeswax candles we can use, which are the sacred fire. So fire is always an element of worship in pagan worship, so there is an element of fire and lighting up the darkness. We have a trigil, and I don't know whether you can see, but it's got soil of the motherland in it. We pour, at the most sacred point of the rite, we pour the mead as an offering to the gods and goddesses in the trigil, in an act which is very, some people would think, well, this is very counterproductive, very counter-cultural. You've got this wonderful mead, which we think highly of, which is a lot of mythological resonances, and you're making a mess of it and making it, you're pouring it away, you're wasting it, but actually it's an offering to the gods. So we're giving up something, which is of value. Mead is of value, and we're giving up to the gods. So we have a mead horn here, this one is in a stand, and a jug for the mead. And we have an oath ring, this particular oath ring here is, well, we have several oath rings. At our midsummer gathering recently, we had a pledge of faith. That's an oath sworn on the oath ring of allegiance to the gods. And we have a Thor's hammer here, a representation of the Thor's hammer, which is a symbol of the religion. And really, it symbolizes the defense against the enemies of Asgarth, but also the protection, the sign of protection for the people. And this is what we bless the horn of mead with, as was done in the days of King Haakon, if you read the Heimskringla, and so on.
Now I was curious to know, why is the temple decorated the way that it is?
Yes, well, things are kept pretty simple, and I think that's what I want to say about it. We actually shortened these balustrades because we want access to the people to the altar. Things are kept simple. I don't really love the churches which are too ornate or too embellished with gold and silver, as you see on many churches in the continent, or which are too grandiose. I think there's an atmosphere here. You come from this street where if you come from the main part of town, you don't see the windows because there are no windows on the south side and the west side, and you step inside and then there are these very large windows letting in so much light, and it's a very light, airy place. It's very cheerful and peaceful. I just think people sense that atmosphere, and maybe it has something to do with the pastel shades which I chose for the walls, but anyway. So yes, I just think keep it simple, and the worship is quite simple, really. So although we do have ritual, they're simple rituals. Like the sign of the hammer and the name of the Aesir and the Vanny of all the powers of Asgard. It's a very simple ritual which people can learn quite easily and so on. And we turn to the north at certain stages because we're a northern people worshipping the gods of the north. So they're meaningful symbols, just like the offering of mead is a meaningful rite. And then, of course, we pass the horn round, and people like to raise it and make a prayer or a toast or a pledge. And I was very impressed at our midsummer gathering with the comments that people were making as they raised the horn. It was just very sincere and very moving, I thought. So that's the motto, keep it simple, I think. What I should say, though, is that, and I say this to we have lots of visitors on our open days, and I invite them, if they want, to do what I call my little tour, and I focus a little bit on the history of the building, but also on the paintings, which are a very good introduction to the mythology. But I always start off by saying that the gods are spirit. In my opinion, at least, the gods are spirit. So why do we represent them in this physical way as human beings writ large, and why are they represented in this way in the myths? And I say that when we raise our mind to the gods in prayer and meditation, we inevitably, being flesh and blood creatures, make images in our minds of the gods, and these images are what are translated into by these pictures here, but also the images of the gods, the representation of the gods that we have in the myths. So we say that we do not believe in the myths, but we believe in the gods about whom the myths instruct us. So anyway, this is a fantastic picture. It's almost of Odin, almost monochrome, by an artist called Clive Barrett, an excellent artist. And I was alerted to him by a greetings card which had this design that a member sent me, and I contacted the artist and I said, could you do an oil painting on your greetings card? And he was able to do that. I was very strict about the dimensions that we needed, so he did this wonderful picture which I really think expresses the essence of Odin almost better than almost any other picture, or as much as the best of other pictures I have seen of Odin, as Odin the wayfarer, Odin the pilgrim, and a seeker after knowledge and wisdom, with Hugin and Munin and so forth. And this is one of Clive Barrett's as well, of Thor, and I just love the way that the goats are rearing out of the screen there, out of the frame, and you see the detail. He's done a lot of research. One of the goats is lame, and and in the storm clouds and the thunder and lightning going on. So this is marvelous. Now, I just thought I'd mention, I wish I brought one along, because I have acquired one from the Royal Mint. The Royal Mint has done these little gold and silver bars depicting Odin and depicting Thor with runes on them as well, which is wonderful because it makes me think the gods are stirring things up. They're stirring things up amongst, some committee in the Royal Mint has decided what design for bars should we have. And someone said, why don't we do Odin and Thor? And the one of Thor looks identical to this on a goat-drawn chariot with a goat sort of rearing out of the screen, and Thor holding his hammer like that. So I just wonder if they've sort of looked on the website and seen that. And very briefly, this is a beautiful painting, a very beautiful painting. All the paintings are quite beautiful, but this one is especially painting. And this was painted in the USA, so it was sent over in the post, very professionally wrapped, and I had to pay VAT on it, which I think is a bit of a swift, actually. Anyway, it's for Frigg, the wife of Odin, and Frigg, as we know, is equally wise as Odin, but unlike Odin, who transmits his knowledge to mankind, Frigg does not prophesy. She keeps her secrets to herself. So she's represented, I suppose, as a lady of secrets. And when we had a school visit here, I love the bit, we had about 4 school visits from 8 and 9-year-old primary school children, and I gave them a brief talk. And they were really thrilled by it, actually. I got some lovely thank you notes from the children afterwards, which I have kept. And the teacher at the end of the sessions said, now boys and girls, I want you all to stand in front of the god or goddess that you like the most. And lots of the girls came and stood in front of this one. I said, so why do you like this picture so much? And they said, oh, we like secrets. Little girls like secrets. So I just love the beautiful gold and purple background and the grey, which reminds me of the Frank's casket here, and there are runic inscriptions up here, which is upside down, but because the lid is open. And this was painted by an artist who's actually an illustrator called Sam Flagle of Nashville, Tennessee. So I think he's done a very good job. So I should mention about these artists that it's quite difficult to find artists who represent the human form. There are lots of landscape artists, abstract artists and so forth, but all of these artists had, although they're not Odinists, had done something on the theme of the mythology or the Green Man or something like that. So they had shown an interest in some related theme, and all of them had done a lot of research on their own, and so they really threw themselves into it, which I think is wonderful. But these little carvings we have are by a member, and I think, I'm not sure, I think he might have done it with the chainsaw, but how he managed to do that, I don't know. But this is a wonderful one of Odin, as king anyway.
The likes of Odin and Thor have different names that are used around Europe. The Odinist Temple go by the Norse names of the gods, and there are specific names for the gods the Anglo-Saxons used. Thanks to my good friend Beowulf, who is the co-host of the heathen book discussion podcast, the Newark Roundtable, I'm able to give a deeper insight in where these names came from. Woden, a Pan-Germanic god known to the Norse as Oven, to the Saxons as Jordan, and to the Germans as Wotan, to the Frisians as Voida, to the Dutch as Wodan, to the Lombards as Godan. His name comes from the Proto-Germanic Wodenas, which means Lord of Woad, or Lord of Fury, Frenzy, Possession, Manic Inspiration, the divinely inspired frenzy of battle on which drives poetry and song. The root of his name gives us Irish faith and Latin vedes, both meaning soothsayer or prophet. However, Woden is unique to the Germanic pantheon of gods with no other direct Indo-European parallels. He is known by many names which show the many facets of his worship as a god of war, or poetry, of wisdom and esoteric knowledge. Frigg, the wife of Woden, a goddess known to the Norse as Frigg, to the Germans as Freyr, to the Lombards as Freyr. Her name comes from the Proto-Germanic Freo, meaning loved one or wife. She may have once been the same goddess whom the Norse know separately as Freyr, and thus would bear the title Froe to the Anglo-Saxons. Funor, the son of Woden and Earth, a god known to the Norse as Thor, to the Saxons as Funar, to the Germans as Donar. His name is identical to the word for thunder from Proto-Germanic Funras, and is more widely cognate with the Cornish god of thunder, Taranis, and is also an epithet for Jupiter, or Jupiter Tonans, meaning thundering Jupiter. He may have been known by another name, Fjorgen, from Ferganyaz, originally meaning forested mountain land, which may come from the root perk, meaning oak, and thus related to Perkinus, as a Slavic Purun and Baltic Perkinus. He is attested in various places among Anglo-Saxon poetry, especially the dialogues of Solomon and Saturn, where he is said to thrash with his fiery axe, recording an earlier axe hammer rather than a kind of short-handled hammer seen in Norse traditions. He is also known in place names such as Thursley in Surrey and Thundersley in Sussex. Most people are completely oblivious to the fact that the days of the week are in fact named after the Germanic gods. Monday, Mona's Day. Tuesday, Tyr's Day. Wednesday, Woden's Day. Thursday, Thor's Day. Friday, Frigg's Day. Saturday, Sita's Day. Sunday, Sunna's Day. These names come from what's called Interpretatio Romana, where the Germanic tribes who otherwise did not name their days of the week adopted this Roman custom and translated their gods. A list of more English gods can be found in the description.
Now I was very interested to know the history of the building itself, and I'm sure you are too, and Ralph was able to give me some great information.
Yeah, so the building was built in 1556. It's the second oldest ecclesiastical building in Newark after the parish church, but as the parish church is closed down at the moment for a whole year for renovations, it is actually at the moment, the oldest functioning ecclesiastical building. And it's built of ashlar limestone, a local limestone. So as you see, there are many original features, like the doorway is original. Yes, it was built in 1556 in the reign of Mary I, who was the daughter of Henry VIII. So it was a Tudor-style building. It's a listed building, Grade 2 listed, and it was originally an almshouse chapel. After the almshouse charity collapsed, it was taken over by the district council, and they basically locked it up. And as you know, when an old building is locked up, it deteriorates very rapidly. And so we had a great deal of restoration work to do when we moved in at our own expense. So this is an interesting feature. Like, you can just about see better with the sun shining on it. There was a door here, a door that came all the way down, and it would have probably had a step going up because the ground level of the podium is actually raised from the main area of the building. So the ground actually goes up. And this would have been for the priest originally, the Christian priest, to go in. He wouldn't have used the same door as his congregation. So that's just an interesting feature. This is the east window. And I just thought I'd point out some graffiti. HB 1735, presumably a builder's mark. And then on the other side you have initials which look like JH. This was all covered in paint when we acquired it, and the paint was so old that it looked like cracked plaster. It was really horrible, and the builders very professionally scraped it off, and that's when the graffiti was revealed, so we weren't aware of that before. And as you see, this is an old historic. It probably needs a bit of touching up in some point, a bit of pointing done. This is probably a Victorian restoration bit. It isn't what we did. But yes, there we are. Right, so I just thought I'd show you this. This is the north window, and as you can see, it's a very old, the window, not the window panes, but the window frame itself. There's a technical word, chamfered, I think it's chamfered, and it's quite wibbly-wobbly, which you only get with really old buildings, so that's a wibbly-wobbly window. So in the centre there, when we acquired this building, there was a stone which was missing, and the birds were sort of perching in there. So as part of the restoration, we were able to get permission to insert a stone, Yorkshire limestone, I think it is, sandstone. And I said to the builders, I said, if I draw a design, can you etch it in? Can you carve it in to the stone? And they said, yes, absolutely. So I drew Thor's hammer, and they've placed it there, and it looks as if it really belongs there, right in the centre of the west gable. So sort of we left our mark, rather discreetly, but upon the building.
This is obviously a huge deal for heathens around the world. And I was interested to know, what do other pagans from around the world feel about temples being built and temples being converted from churches?
So on the topic of, pagan temples being built, this is a great development. It's really good. I mean, it speaks to the seriousness of our religions, the fact that they're becoming institutionally embodied. I mean, it's a literal sanctuary for our folk to go and have a place of worship, and for, our gods to inhabit. And in fact, on this topic of the gods inhabiting a place, one of the things that makes paganisms unique is that they are in fact rooted to a place. The concept of sacred geography is inherent, really, in paganisms. They are ultimately religions of the soil. And for us, having a fixed place of worship is incredibly significant. Not only just as a symptom that we're winning, but also it acts as a kind of magnet to draw more people in. So it's incredibly important that we have these things. Now, as for them being converted from churches, I'm kind of two minds on this. I mean, on the one hand, I think we will essentially need to repurpose some Christian forms. And by that, I don't mean that we are going to need to adopt parts of Christianity, but that many parts of Christianity are just adopted paganism, basically. So we will need to sift out the parts of Christian folk religion that are just native to us. And I think the architecture of churches is part of that. For example, stave churches are obviously pagan in spirit. You look at the architecture and it's very clear. Same with Gothic architecture more broadly. So that, for example, is something that we can adopt. But on the other hand, these Christian churches are haunted. They are haunted by the ghosts of a foreign religion, basically. Like, they were used for thousands of years to orient our people toward an alien culture. And we are pagans. We believe in land spirits. So those land spirits are there, and they will need to be properly exorcised, for lack of a better term. We will need to purge them of their ghosts, basically.
Not only is this a big deal for pagans, but this has no doubt raised a few eyebrows from some Christians as well. So I got in touch with a Christian content creator and asked him how he feels about this.
Hey, my name's Matt. I became really interested in the subject of what some call paganism or heathenry when I started to look into my own history being a Scandinavian American, and I wanted to learn more about, okay, how did we become Christians back in the day? What did we believe before that? I think certainly I was always drawn to some of the imagery of certainly the medieval world in general. I've always been fascinated by medieval history of knights and Vikings and going on the Crusades and castles. All of these things were so captivating to me growing up as a kid. And then as I got older, trying to understand the religious history, it's like, well, what I've noticed, especially in America, is that Christian practice today is very much divorced from the aesthetic imagery, the symbolic language that we would find if we were to look at a more medieval understanding of Christianity and religion overall. There's always a tendency for any institution to bend towards the powers that be, to bend its outlook towards what is comfortable or convenient at the time. And I think to a great extent in a lot of Western nations, we have seen various Christian institutions, various denominations move their theology, move their expression of Christianity in such a way that it aligns more with power, what we Christians would call the spirit of the age, like the culture of the time, what is popular or doesn't get you in trouble to do, what the most social pressure is pushing towards. A lot of Christian institutions and denominations have been steadily moving their expression of Christian teaching to better match and align itself with the mainstream, with whatever is convenient at the time. And of course that changes from place to place, and it changes from century to century what the taboos of the age are, what the values are that are expressed by the politics and the establishment of the age. And when that happens, sometimes the spirit of the age is more in line with proper Christian teaching and virtue and conduct, but other times it's not. And I think you find in a lot of Western nations this increasing tendency for many churches to cede ground on key issues, to really become extensions of the spirit of the age itself, just with a sort of Christian mask over it. And what happens as a consequence is that does not actually bring the true power of Christianity, the sort of radical salvific power and life-transforming power of Christianity and the Christian faith to people when Christianity just becomes aligned with what is popular or what is already out there. I've also noticed too that, especially in America and in the colonies overall, the churches that we worship in tend to be very much separated and divorced from a clear aesthetic influence that you'd find in Northwest European history, like what you'd see in England or what you would find in Norway or Germany. One thing you'll notice as well, if you spend any time in America, for instance, or around the colonies especially, is that we are even further removed from our historical expressions of Christian faith. So if you look at our church architecture, if you look at our art, if you look at our worship practices, these are considerably more removed from what was in essence a very natural evolution. You know, when we became Christianized, we didn't suddenly change our architectural styles in the Middle Ages. We didn't suddenly change our musical approaches. We didn't suddenly build radically different buildings or change our technology dramatically. It was a much more organic process of expressing Christian worship in a way that was resonant with our instincts and with our ancient ways of understanding or attempting to connect with God. So what you find instead, though, is a form of Christianity today that has probably in some ways bled back into Europe, that is very much, it's liminal, you know, it's like, it's this sort of transitionary space that's not really a clear culture, that doesn't have a clear cultural connection to any one tradition or another. And so I think naturally people who are drawn to various forms of sort of revival of pagan or heathen practices, they're certainly drawn by the more natural expression of it, if you were to say, like getting out into nature more, or pulling in imagery from nature, or imagery and practices from our ancient history. And so it's a very natural gap that has been left that people are certainly craving for and desiring. So certainly when it comes to heathen groups moving into what were once Christian churches, taking that over, there is a certain sorrow that I feel for that. But that is in a sense because Christianity in those regions has often already died a long time ago, either through apostasy or towns simply shrinking. You may see small towns and everyone moves off to the city. But you see, in a sense, that the sort of life in that area has already died to a great extent. I wouldn't be surprised, certainly, to see various pagan practices and religious movements grow in the coming decades or even the coming century. I think we're already seeing that quite a bit. But I also don't think that this heralds the death of Christianity. Rather, I think it shows that there's this immense desire for spiritual connection, for spiritual meaning in people's lives, and that people are looking around for answers to their life, and they're looking around to community, and they're looking around for something that has proper beauty, that brings consolation to the suffering of life and brings people together as well. And that's something that shows that I think not only will there be this sort of pagan development and cultural revival in Western countries, but there will also be more than likely Christian revival as well. But it will be Christian revival in many ways that I think looks something akin to the aesthetic expression of paganism today, where it is more in touch with the various histories of the nations it's a part of, where it is something that's a bit more in touch with nature, that's a bit more community and historically oriented, and which has this sense really of seeing magic and power and beauty in the natural world and in its expressions of worship, something that looks more like perhaps a bit more medieval or neo-Gothic even, something that is certainly tapping into these Gothic instincts that have been left to the wayside. And that comes down to the art, that comes down to the symbolism, that comes down to the sort of sense of togetherness, community and national connection that people are craving.
Something that the Odinist Fellowship have done over the years is assist Odinists with legal matters. Funerals and burials are generally not catered for people who follow native polytheistic spirituality, and prayer rooms only seem to be catered for people who follow Abrahamic religions. Ralph has worked tirelessly to make sure Odinists are recognised and taken seriously in such cases.
We've had quite a lot of campaigns and individual cases that we've dealt with, so I could go into quite a lot of detail about that. The Odinist Fellowship is a registered charity. It has been registered for nearly 35 years. Now, the reason that we got registered was that under the old charity law, the charity law has been changed during the premiership of Tony Blair, but under the old charity law, there were only 5 headings under which an organisation could be registered as a charity, of which the advancement of religion was one. And so we thought, well, this is what we're doing. We're advancing religion. We're advancing the Odinist religion. We should be registered as a charity. It wasn't that straightforward when we applied for charitable status. We were advised that although the law said advancement of religion, this really referred to monotheistic religions, in other words, Christian and Jewish religions, and they were, in fact, the only religious charities that existed at that time. So when we applied, there were certain hurdles put in our way by the Charity Commission, and they certainly asked a lot of information for a lot of substantive documentation and so forth, which we were able to provide. And so, to cut a long story short, we were registered, as I say, around about 35 years ago, or it might even be 40 years ago now, but a long time, and we've continuously been registered since then. And we are therefore the first pagan or heathen, non-monotheistic, non-Christian, non-Jewish religious charity that has been registered as a charity. And so we've opened the gates for others to follow in our path. Not necessarily being thanked for it, but we have opened the gates for them. And we've also registered the Newark Odinist Temple as a charity, the Newark Odinist Temple Trust, I should say, and we registered it as a place of worship under the Places of Worship Registration Act, which is an act I don't think many people are familiar with. They're probably familiar with registering births, deaths, and marriages at the local registry office, but you also register places of worship there. And so, again, they took their time over it because they had to add a new category, Odinist, onto the database, but eventually they did register us. So every step of the way, we're pushing the boundaries to ensure that Odinism is recognised in English law. In this country, unlike other countries, like in France or Germany, in France or Germany, religions are registered with the state. It might be a Ministry of Religion or a Ministry of Justice. You actually register a religion. That's not the case in this country. It's more piecemeal. So you have various bits of legislation in which you can be registered. Now, you asked about campaigns, and you mentioned about the military headstone that exists now in the Woodland Cemetery in Kent, near Gillingham. And we have, one of the successes we have had, it's a very sad story, I should say, a very tragic story, but one of the successes we have had is that we have persuaded the Ministry of Defence to permit a Thor's hammer to appear on a military headstone. As you know, military headstones are for people who die in service, who are in the armed services, whichever branch of the armed service, and they usually have the badge of the regiment, and then underneath that they will have a religious symbol, which is usually a cross. It could be a Star of David or something else. And we just felt that for Odinist members of the armed forces, if they were to die in service, then they would want a Thor's hammer on their headstone. And so we launched a campaign I called it CROW, the Campaign for the Recognition of Odinist Warriors. And I circulated to our members these petition sheets. Now, I don't want to mention the name of the person, but he was Lance Corporal. Should I just leave it at that? People can find out the details, I think, if they do some research. But so this young man, anyway, so I circulated these petition sheets which outlined our intentions in this campaign, and also for getting recognition, so that people who join the army or the navy or the air force can register their religion as Odinist, because, as you know, the first question they ask is, what's your religion? After they ask your name and address, they ask, what is your religion? Because you might die, and they want to know what to do in terms of burying you or religious services and that sort of thing. So up until that point, you may be amused to know it was possible to register yourself as Satanist and join the army, and they had an option for that. They had an option for the peculiar people. So I don't know many peculiar people, but apparently some of them are in the army. But they didn't have an option for Odinist. And so we thought that should change, and also the military headstone issue, having a Thor's hammer on the military headstone. Now, I circulated these, and this particular Lance Corporal, who was a member of the Odinist Fellowship, he told me that he'd returned the petition sheet, signed the petition sheet, but I hadn't received it, so I badgered him for it and sent him another copy, and he returned that signed. And then very shortly after that, obviously neither of us knew at the time that there was very little time left. Very shortly after that, he died under tragic circumstances whilst overseas on service with the army. And I was in touch with his family and suggested to them that it would be a great honour for the Lance Corporal, whose name I won't mention at the time because it involves his family, of course, to be the first serving soldier to have the Thor's hammer on a military headstone. And his widow, who had 2 young children, very sad, warmed to this greatly. And so I sent an email marked urgent to the MOD saying I was acting on behalf, I was the priest of the family, I was acting on behalf of the family, and they had let it be known that they wanted the Thor's hammer on the headstone. And I was absolutely amazed, because I'd been writing to the various ministers of defence or Secretary of State for Defence and not getting replies about our Crow campaign for quite a while. And I got a reply within 2 days, because they were obviously aware of this soldier who had died. And what they asked me was first for a design of the Thor's hammer, and so I was able to supply them with a simple design which is easy to carve onto a headstone. And secondly, or firstly really, did I have any written evidence that he wanted to have a Thor's hammer on the headstone? Now, in the normal course of things, I might have a conversation with a member who's a member of the armed forces, and he might say, yes, I'd really like to have a Thor's hammer. If I were to die, I would want a Thor's hammer. Am I not going to get written evidence for that? Well, I did have written evidence, because I'd got this petition sheet and I was able to send a copy of that to them. And so that answered that question. And so it was sort of amazing, really. And I think the gods had a hand in that. And anyway, so they granted it, and so we have had, and so it set a precedent. So there is a headstone. Fortunately, only one. We don't want to see rows and rows of headstones with Thor's hammers on them, because every case is a tragedy and the loss of a brave young life. But we have, pushed the boundaries again and established recognition of the religion and of our religious symbol, the Thor's hammer, to be displayed on a military headstone, which is very important to people in the armed forces. So that is something that they can rely on.
I was very touched by the story. I was very curious to see the headstone myself. I also wanted to talk about this publicly and spread awareness of the matter. So I got in touch with the widow of the deceased soldier in question, who was happy for me to reveal his name, tell the story, and show you the headstone.
The deceased soldier was a young male called Keen Smurfwaite, a lance corporal in the army. While away on a work-related exercise in Tallinn, Estonia, and after going back to his accommodation following going for a meal and a drink with his associates, he didn't wake up after falling asleep. He was found the following day by his corporal, and his death was ruled as a positional asphyxia.
So this is a headstone of Keen Smurfwaite. Very, very beautiful headstone. And for me, it was really impactful to see. Us pagans, we walk around these cemeteries, we enjoy the peace, the calmness, the tranquility of cemetery, but of course there's Christian iconography everywhere, and that doesn't resonate with us like with Christians. So when I saw this headstone with a Thor's hammer on it, it was really impactful. This should be a standard rite for Odinists in the UK.
Keen now rests with the appropriate headstone, showing the religious path he walked, and it was all thanks to this man.
Now for the big question. Can Odinism overtake Christianity? And can we go back to being a predominantly polytheistic society?
Do I think it could overtake Christianity? Yes, I mean, ultimately I do, but it's going to be some time before that happens. There are a lot of factors at play here, but generally, paganism tends to spread organically. And what I mean by that is basically demographically, like by conquest, by birth rates, and so forth. Whereas Christianity tends to spread virally. And by that I mean it spreads by proselytism, basically. So this gives Christianity a huge advantage. I mean, it can grow exponentially because it's not tied to a folk or anything like that. But something interesting has been happening. The fact is that Christianity is no longer the religion of our folk. And in fact, it's increasingly being seen as a third world religion. And also, it really has no more room to spread virally. It's already a global religion and has been for thousands of years. So really, I mean, the only way it can spread now is organically. You know, like that is by raising birth rates and promoting ethnocentrism and so on and so forth. But can it really do those things? I mean, historically, Christianity has led straight to liberalism. So I don't think that Christianity can compete with paganism in spreading demographically or organically, as I've said. And this is why basically it had to spread virally in the first place. So we may be entering historical conditions where paganisms have an advantage in terms of growth and expansion over Christianity.
Ralph seems very enthusiastic on the matter. When I asked him, he said,
Absolutely, yes. So I think there's a great future for Odinism amongst the indigenous English and more widely British people. And I think that ultimately, and it's our ultimate aim and goal as the Odinist Fellowship, is an Odinist England. Now, when I say an Odinist England, I don't mean 100% Odinist, I don't mean a hegemony, I don't mean that we're going to eliminate other religions like Christianity, or that everyone will be converted to our religion. No, there will be minorities and there will be non-believers. But I envisage a future, now this may sound crazy, but I envisage a future when the great majority of English people are Odinists, and that is a spiritual revolution. And the biggest part of that spiritual revolution is that I'm envisaging a change from a secularized, godless, non-believing, sort of aimless, directionless society, such as we have now, where there are no real ideals or only fake ideals, and people are enmeshed in the consumerist society. I'm envisaging a change from that to a nation which has regained faith and regained spirituality and regained religion and religious devotion, and therefore also regained a bearing and a grounding in ethics. And so this is a change which will affect every area of life. So it will be a societal change, it will be a cultural change, it will be a difference, it will mean a difference in our education, in every aspect of life, and yes, in politics, but in every aspect of life. But to get to that end point, which I would describe as a long-term goal, the long-term plan, and that long-term plan would correspond to having Odinist temples, because people will have to have somewhere to worship. Where are they going to worship? Where are the people in English villages going to worship? We've got all these great big churches in English villages. They're beautiful buildings. Many of them are lying empty now, or hardly ever used. Or you've got Church of England vicars who are run ragged, I feel sorry for them, operating half a dozen churches, in group ministries, whereas they were designed for one parish priest or parish vicar to occupy that one parish. Now they're doing half a dozen or more, and of course they've got a crisis of ordinations. They've got all sorts of crises going on, and a plummeting congregational numbers. So yes, we will ultimately take over many of these places of worship and refashion them to our own purposes. We'll preserve them, but refashion them. They're not the sort of buildings that we would maybe have built of our own volition, and we may build temples of our own as well, of course. But what the long-term plan envisages is that we will have a temple in every town and village and suburb of England. Now, we're a long way from that. The medium-term plan is that we would have, say, 40 or maybe 50 temples. In other words, one in every county, more or less, in England, so that people could attend their local temple within an hour's ride or drive, so that most people would find, 90% of people would find it accessible within an hour's drive. And the short-term plan, which we're working on now, would be 5 or 6, half a dozen temples in strategic areas and different parts of the country. So one in the north, one in the southwest, one in the southeast, one in the West Midlands, this sort of thing, one in Scotland, so that people would have a fairly local temple that they could visit and cherish and use and open up to the public for public meetings as well. And so this is our aim, and this is what we're working on now.
And to add to this, I asked a long-time contact and friend who is a member of the Odinist Fellowship on his views on the matter about temples being built, being converted from churches, and could Odinism overtake Christianity?
On the subject of pagan temples being built or converted from churches, I think it's a welcome step forward. Heathens in decades gone by have been forced, largely out of necessity, to gather outdoors in woodlands, fields, and often on public land. It honours the gods to glorify them in any setting, but having a dedicated structure allows us greater freedom to worship, and gives a single place for people to come together from all over the country, making in many ways Newark the beating heart of a developing Odinist community. As for the matter of them being conversions from Christian churches, what I think people need to remember is there are many examples of churches and chapels that were intentionally built on older sites important to the pagan people of Britain before the conversions. The Newark Temple was a chapel rather than a church, but in considering the site for a second temple, we have discussed the adoption of churches, including some with graveyards on the land. Sentiment towards this that I've heard within the community is that we should feel honoured to take on the responsibility, and would make it a point of pride to ensure that they were cared for. Despite not honouring our gods, these are our people, our ancestors, and we want to make sure they are respected and their memories cared for. Eventually, we would like to pursue building new temples, designed to honour the gods as their original intention. While this goal may be a little further from realisation, the first purpose-built temple will be another landmark achievement in the story of the growth and renewal of our faith. Regarding Odinism or paganism overtaking Christianity, I think the answer to that question varies by definition. Globally, Christianity is on the rise, particularly in the global south, which isn't a trend I see changing anytime soon. Importantly, Christianity and its cousin Islam are proselytizing religions that actively seek for as many conversions as they can manage. Odinism doesn't proselytize in this way. If we broaden the idea of pagan external to a European worldview, then we absolutely would love to see peoples all over the world embrace the native faiths which have typically been repressed. In the UK in particular, I do think it's a bit of a different story. On the census, we can see between 2011 and 2021 a decrease to the Christian population by 13%. Meanwhile, the increase in no religion was a comparable 12%. At the same time, paganism is on a slow but definite rise, often undercounted due to being recorded across multiple different categories. I suspect many of the people who put no religion will eventually feel the pull to revert back to the old ways. And it's our duty as heathens not to push it on them, but to be ready to embrace them as kin, providing support, community, and guidance when they do.
So there we have it. That's the Odinist Temple here in Newark. A very, very exciting project. And for me personally, I cannot wait to see it flourish and for more temples to open throughout the country. For me, especially as a religious pagan, this is a very exciting thing. So what do you think? Do you have any reservations about this? Do you think it's worthy to have more pagan temples throughout the country open up? Are you a Christian and got a problem with a Christian church that's been converted into a temple? Tell us in the comments. I really want to hear more opinions. But until then, thank you for watching.
I would like to say a huge thank you to the guests that featured. Please subscribe to their channels. The links can be found in the description. I want to say also a massive thank you to my Patreon members and channel members. Your support really goes a long way in helping putting these videos together. If you're new here, please subscribe and help the channel grow. Thank you.